It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the quiet unraveling of who you thought you were, of how much you were worth, of what your presence meant in someone else's life. The day she left, or the day you finally did, wasn't loud, but something deeper collapsed inside you. And no one saw it. No one asked, because you were the man. And men are supposed to get over it, but you didn't. Not really. You just got quieter. What no one tells you is that breakups don't just remove a person. They fracture your voice, your direction. They turn your own mind against you, whispering that somehow you were the failure, that if you had just spoken less or more, given more space or held on tighter, maybe, just maybe, she would have stayed. And so you replay it, again and again, until guilt becomes your rhythm and self-doubt becomes your sleep. But here's the truth most won't say. The trap wasn't her leaving. The trap was what you started believing after she did. You see, this isn't about her. Not anymore. This is about the things you accepted in silence, the blame you carried without speaking, the invisible weight of always being the man while quietly forgetting you were human too. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, didn't begin his path through comfort. He began it through shipwreck. His literal collapse was the birth of his philosophy. His destruction, the permission to build again. Maybe this breakup, this loss, this silence is your shipwreck. Maybe the man you thought you were had to break, so the one you were meant to be could start speaking again. Not louder, but clearer. Seneca once wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity." In other words, the worst life is the one that never forced you to rebuild. And I know, right now, it doesn't feel like a lesson. It feels like a loss, like something sacred was taken from you without warning. But sometimes what feels like abandonment is just fate breaking your mirrors. So you finally stop looking at her and start seeing yourself. This video is not an attack on women, and it's not a therapy session. It's a quiet confrontation with the subtle psychological games that are rarely named, but deeply felt. It's about emotional patterns disguised as kindness, control wrapped in silence, blame hidden in guilt, and the masculine instinct to fix used against you. This is for the man still circling his own wounds, the man still explaining himself to a silence that never answers. This is not about revenge, not about getting her back. It's about finding the version of you that doesn't need her anymore. No rage, no noise, just truth and a way out. There's a moment after the breakup, when the house is quiet, the door has closed, and the silence feels heavier than her words ever did. That's when it begins, the reflection, but not of who she was, of who you were told you were. And the voice that starts to echo isn't hers anymore, it's yours, repeating her phrases, absorbing her tone, asking yourself if maybe she was right. You were too controlling. You didn't know how to love me. You never made me feel safe. You hear these lines, not as wounds, but as definitions, and something inside you accepts them, not because they were true, but because she cried when she said them, because she looked tired, because you loved her. And love for you always meant taking responsibility, even for things you didn't do. Many women don't scream to shift blame. They mirror it, calmly, gently, with a tone that says, "I'm only telling you this so you can grow." But beneath the softness is a slow dismantling of your self-worth. You begin to question not just your actions, but your character. The man who once led now kneels before an emotional courtroom where only one story is allowed to exist. If you were raised without the language to process emotion, without a map for shame, projection, or boundary, you will do what so many men do. You will believe the reflection. You will turn guilt into identity. You will carry her version of the truth like a weight tied to your chest. But guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's a symptom of conditioning, of being told again and again that if something went wrong, it must be you. It must be your tone, your presence, your expectations. And so you apologize, not for what you did, but for who you are. There is a kind of emotional abuse that never raises its voice. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't accuse. It simply reinterprets history until you no longer trust your own memory, until your truth is filtered through her disappointment, until you forget that you too were hurting, that you too were neglected. Cognitive dissonance is a cruel thing. It makes you chase clarity from the very person who confused you. It makes you seek comfort from the hand that tightened around your peace. And that desperation to make sense of it all, that's when the guilt mirror works best. When you're still trying to understand her, when you believe that if you just take more blame, you might finally feel forgiven. But Stoicism offers a different frame. It doesn't tell you to fight the guilt. It tells you to observe it, to sit with it, to ask, not what she meant, but why you needed her words to mean more than your own. You are not what you feel, the Stoics teach. You are what you respond to. You are not her disappointment. You are not her narrative. You are not a broken man. You are simply a man who once loved someone who couldn't carry her own reflection, so she handed it to you. And you, not knowing better, held it like truth. But now, it's time to let it fall. There are breakups that end with shouting, doors slammed, words thrown like knives. But then there are others, the kind that unravel in silence. No fights, no closure, just distance. Cold, clean, calculated distance. And you're left standing in the echo, trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to be solved. She stops answering. Her tone shifts, her presence fades, and the silence grows louder than any insult. Because this isn't just absence, it's suggestion. It suggests you did something wrong, that your behavior drove her away, that your inability to get it is why she's emotionally gone. And so, you start to beg, not dramatically, not on your knees, but through your words, through your over-explaining, through the emotional essays you write at 2 a.m., just hoping she'll respond with something other than seen. This isn't boundary, it's bait, and the more you chase, the deeper you fall into it. Masculine instinct is wired for resolution. You want to repair, you want to fix, you want to restore the bond, not just to win her back, but to reclaim your own peace. But what happens when your need to repair becomes the very thing used to keep you stuck? Her silence becomes a trigger, not because you did something wrong, but because she knows you'll interpret it that way. It's not rejection, it's control, and that control is quiet, strategic. It doesn't need explanation, it just waits. It lets you dig the emotional hole yourself, and the deeper you go, the more you question your value. You think, if I just say the right thing, if I just give her space, if I just admit everything, maybe she'll come back. But she's already gone, and what you're chasing now isn't love. It's relief from a guilt that was never yours to carry. Epictetus said, "You are disturbed not by events, but by your attachment to them." The silence isn't the problem, it's what it touches in you. The part that still believes love must be earned. The part that thinks closure is owed. The part that confuses withdrawal with mystery, and mystery with hope. But not all silence is spiritual. Some silence is punishment, some silence is a leash. And the more you talk into it, the tighter it gets. There was a man once. He didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He just kept writing her, trying to understand, trying to get answers. He wanted clarity, but what he lost was his voice. Not because she took it, but because he gave it away, one unanswered message at a time. When a woman detaches but leaves the door open just enough for you to keep knocking, it's not love, it's emotional power. And the only way out is not to slam the door, it's to stop standing in front of it. Stillness is not weakness, silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the only way to remind yourself, you don't need her words to know your worth. You don't need her approval to feel whole again. And you never needed her response to finally be done. Tears have power, not because they prove truth, but because they awaken the protector in you, the part that still sees her as fragile, still believes that if she's crying, she must still care. But not every tear is born from connection. Some are habits, some are escapes, and some are just echoes of the guilt she doesn't want to carry alone. You saw her cry, maybe for the first time in weeks, maybe after days of silence, and something inside you softened. You thought, she's still here, she still feels something. But what you didn't see, what your heart refused to see, is that she had already left. Not physically, emotionally, logically, completely. Some women cry not because they're broken, but because they want to appear broken while walking away. It softens the exit. It confuses the narrative. It lets them keep the upper hand while still appearing human. And for the man who leads with integrity, who still believes in emotional honesty, that performance cuts deep. You mistake her grief for indecision. You mistake the tears for hesitation. But she's not undecided. She's not torn. She's resolved. And the tears, they're not about you. They're about her. Her fear of being seen as the one who gave up. Her sadness over how she'll be perceived. Her guilt for walking away from someone who gave her everything and still wasn't enough for her to stay. Men aren't trained to decode emotional projection. We see pain and we want to heal it. We see tears and we move closer. But what if the tears weren't asking you to come closer? What if they were just a ritual, an emotional closing statement she needed to say to herself, a way to leave clean without looking cruel? Stoic practice teaches us not to interpret emotion as truth. Observe it, witness it, but don't let it guide your decisions. Emotion is not a compass, it's a wave. It passes, and when it does, clarity returns, if you've stayed still long enough not to drown in it. She may cry, she may shake, she may hold your hand and say she doesn't know what she wants, but she knows. She always knew, and if you're honest with yourself, you knew too. The grief trap works because it makes you feel chosen again, just for a moment, just long enough to believe there's still a path back, but there isn't. What she's grieving isn't you. It's the version of herself she can't carry into her next chapter. Let her cry, let her whisper, let her act like the wound is mutual, but don't mistake that emotion for invitation. She's not handing you a key, she's closing a door, softly, slowly, so she doesn't have to hear it click. And the strongest thing you can do is not reopen it, not this time. She says she still wants to talk, that you meant something, that just because the relationship ended, it doesn't mean the connection has to. And for a moment, that sounds noble, mature, even comforting. After all, how can someone care so deeply and still choose distance? But that's the illusion. She doesn't want you back. She wants your availability. She wants the peace of knowing you're still orbiting her, even if she's already built a new world without you in it. And you, because you loved her honestly, accept the invitation. You keep the channel open. You reply. You check in, not because you're weak, but because it feels like the last thread connecting you to something real. What you don't realize is that every message, every small interaction, delays your healing, because every time you respond, you tell your nervous system, she's still here, and so your body stays alert, hopeful, confused. She's not trying to hurt you, but she is trying to soften her guilt, to prove to herself and to others that she didn't walk away cold, that she didn't discard you, that she's still a good person. And the easiest way to do that is to keep you emotionally nearby, but relationally distant. This isn't kindness, it's control dressed as compassion. You start waiting again, not in the same way, but emotionally. You wait for the next message, the next call, the next moment of shared memory that makes you feel seen. But you're not being seen, you're being managed. And every conversation is another delay in your return to self. Marcus Aurelius said, "You must let go of false attachments to gain inner order." Post-breakup communication isn't always proof of love. Often it's the barrier between pain and transformation. And as long as she has access, you stay in limbo. Not because of her power, but because of your permission. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean hating. It means choosing your dignity over shared nostalgia. It means realizing that healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with distance, with silence, with the uncomfortable decision to stop responding to something that no longer reflects your worth. One clear decision does more than 1,000 apologies. And peace, real peace, begins when you stop making yourself emotionally available to someone who only wants your presence as proof they were never the villain. She doesn't need you to talk, she needs you to stay quiet, so she can finally hear her own reasons. And maybe, for the first time, so can you. Memory isn't neutral. It bends, it shifts, it serves the stories we want to keep, and during breakups, memory becomes a weapon. Soft, subtle, surgical. She won't call you names. She won't scream about everything you did wrong. She'll just start telling the story differently. Quieter, but with conviction. She'll say you were emotionally unavailable, that she felt alone, that you stopped trying, and maybe, in certain moments, that's true. But what's missing, what she conveniently forgets, is her own absence, her own withdrawals, her own cold silences that slowly pushed you out before you ever pulled away. The danger isn't her rewriting the past. The danger is you starting to agree. You begin to question the timeline. You wonder if maybe you were inattentive, maybe you didn't show up enough, maybe her sadness was your fault. But that's the grief talking. That's the part of you still hoping to earn closure by agreeing with her pain. And in doing so, you abandon your own. Men often suffer not because the breakup happened, but because they surrender their story. They let her define the meaning. They let her version become the truth. And once that happens, every memory becomes contaminated. You stop trusting yourself. You start apologizing for things you once felt proud of. Zeno, the father of Stoicism, believed that truth isn't in appearances, it's in structure, the form of something, not its performance. The rhythm of the relationship matters more than isolated scenes. So ask yourself, what was the real pattern? Who consistently showed up? Who emotionally checked out first? You weren't perfect. No one is. But perfection wasn't the failure. The failure was the rewriting of a shared history into a solo script, where only her wounds were allowed to exist. And this is where you must hold the line. Not by arguing, not by defending, but by remembering. Quietly, firmly, truthfully. Write it down, not to prove her wrong, but to keep yourself from forgetting what actually happened, what she said, what she didn't, what you carried, what she abandoned. Because if you don't anchor your truth, nostalgia will wash it away, and you'll start to mourn a relationship that never really existed the way you remember it. The story matters. Your story matters. And no matter how soft her voice becomes when she rewrites it, your silence must be louder, not through volume, but through certainty. You don't need her to agree. You don't need her to remember it the same way. You just need to remember it clearly enough that you never let her version become your identity. It's the message you didn't expect, the one that arrives after weeks of silence, or the soft words she says when your eyes meet for the last time. I still care about you. And in that moment, something cracks open again. The pain softens, the edge dulls, because it feels like proof that maybe, just maybe, what you had was real. But that phrase doesn't always mean what you think it means. I still care is a beautiful sentence, but beauty isn't the same as truth. Sometimes it's guilt. Sometimes it's habit. Sometimes it's her way of managing the discomfort of having left a man who gave her everything, and now she wants to leave clean, without looking heartless, without fully letting go. It sounds like mercy, but it's control, not through dominance, but through affection, through emotional breadcrumbs that keep you orbiting a version of her that no longer exists. She doesn't want you back. She just doesn't want you to disappear, because your presence, even as an echo, reassures her that she's still a good person. You confuse it for love, for possibility, for a door that might still be open, but it isn't. It's a leash, a soft one, but a leash nonetheless. Men are especially vulnerable to this kind of trap, because when you love with loyalty, with duty, with silence. And when she offers kindness, you don't see the danger. You see the girl you fought for, the softness you missed, the comfort you still crave. But what you're touching isn't her heart, it's her guilt. And guilt can look a lot like tenderness when you're still bleeding. This isn't empathy, it's sedation, a way to quiet your anger, to prevent your departure, to keep you emotionally accessible without having to fully re-engage. The Stoic man knows this. He sees through softness when it's unearned. He doesn't react to tone. He responds to intention. And if the intention is unclear, he doesn't fill in the gaps with fantasy. There was a man once. He held on to her words, replayed them. She said she still cared. And because of that, he waited. For months, for years. He mistook her guilt for affection. And by the time he finally let go, he wasn't just heartbroken. He was exhausted. Not from loving her, but from loving a hope she never asked him to carry. Care is not commitment. Warmth is not a return. And you must know the difference. If she truly cared about you, she would let you go. Fully, cleanly, without sending signals, without feeding hope. But if she chooses to keep you emotionally tethered while walking in another direction, that's not love. That's cowardice. And your healing begins the moment you stop mistaking softness for safety. You don't need her care. You need your clarity. Because care that keeps you stuck isn't compassion, it's captivity, wrapped in kindness. Men want answers. It's how we're built. We want the story to make sense. We want the puzzle to fit. We want the ending to feel earned, even if it hurts. So when she leaves, when she turns cold, when her words no longer match her eyes, we don't just mourn her. We start searching, not for her body, but for the meaning behind her silence, and that search becomes the trap. You begin decoding everything, the way she paused before speaking, the song she posted, the slight tremble in her voice when she said goodbye. You convince yourself there's a message buried inside, that if you look hard enough, you'll find the truth. You'll find the one sentence that explains why she changed, why she stopped, why it all ended without dignity. But meaning is not the same as direction. One keeps you circling, the other sets you free. When you chase meaning, you become emotionally enslaved to someone else's silence. You assign depth to words she barely thought about. You create closure where there was only convenience. And worst of all, you stay emotionally invested in a person who has already redirected her loyalty. The feminine mind moves in waves. It rarely explains its exits. It feels, it shifts, and it moves. And if you keep trying to understand her with masculine logic, you will lose yourself in her rhythm. Chrysippus, one of the great Stoics, taught that clarity doesn't come from emotion. It comes from order, structure, stillness. So the path forward isn't through decoding her. It's through understanding your own need to decode. Why do you still seek meaning in her words? Why does her confusion still govern your peace? Because you're not really trying to understand her. You're trying to hold on to the version of you that existed in her arms. You're trying to resurrect the man who felt worthy in her gaze. But that man isn't dead. He's just disoriented because you gave someone else the power to define your story. The answer you need isn't in her texts. It's not in her silence. It's not in the way she said your name the last time. The answer is in your decision to stop needing her reasoning in order to move forward. Freedom isn't found in explanation. It's found in refusal. Refusal to let confusion lead. Refusal to make sense of what was never honest. Refusal to give meaning to someone who gave you mixed signals and unclear exits. You don't need meaning. You need movement. And the only direction that heals is the one that no longer depends on her. Cut the need to know. Cut the need to understand. And you'll find something stronger than closure. You'll find clarity, your own. These weren't just traps because of her choices. They were traps because of what you never learned to guard. Not your heart, but your clarity, your stillness, your right to walk away without guilt. You were taught to fight for love, but never taught how to leave when that love turned into manipulation, silence, or confusion. And so you stayed. You doubted yourself. You accepted blame. You chased closure. You believed tears meant truth. You kept talking when silence was the only answer she understood. Not because you were weak, but because you were never told that care can be cruel, that kindness can be control, that memory can be a leash. But now you know. Zeno once said that his shipwreck was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it forced him to rebuild. That's what this is, not your failure, your beginning. The moment you stop explaining yourself to ghosts, the moment you stop decoding mixed messages, the moment you stop mistaking guilt for affection. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." These emotional traps were not punishments. They were preparation. You weren't meant to stay confused. You were meant to see, to choose differently, to become unshakable. So picture yourself now, walking a quiet road. Behind you, 5 invisible ropes, each one tied to an illusion. And with every silent step, you feel the tension, but you don't turn back. You don't curse. You don't cry. You just keep walking. And one by one, without noise, they snap. You are not running away. You are returning. Returning to the place in you that never needed her to define your worth. Returning to the still place, where no woman's chaos, no rewritten story, no soft whisper of "I still care" can move you off center. Not because you stopped loving, but because you started remembering who you are.